Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a lake. At first, the air feels calm, even gentle. The water laps against the shoreline with a rhythm that almost lulls you to sleep. But suddenly, without warning, the skies darken. The wind howls. The waves that once whispered now roar, rising taller than you ever imagined possible. In just minutes, the peaceful scene transforms into chaos. Your heart pounds, and every instinct screams that you are no longer safe. Storms have this way of catching us off guard. One moment life feels steady, and the next it feels like everything is unraveling. And the truth is, we've all been in storms. Maybe not always the kind with thunder and lightning, but the storms of life that shake us to our core. Think about it. The storm of hearing a doctor say, "We found something." The storm of seeing your bank account hit zero when bills keep coming. The storm of betrayal by a friend you trusted. The storm of grief after losing someone you love. We might not be in a boat with waves crashing over us, but when anxiety, fear, and uncertainty slam against us, it feels just as overwhelming. This is why the story we're about to dive into is so powerful. Because it isn't just about Jesus stopping a physical storm. It's about what his presence means when our lives are shaking. Let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like God was silent in the middle of your storm? Have you ever looked up and thought, "Where are you? Don't you care that I'm drowning?" You're not alone. Even the disciples, Jesus' closest followers, asked him the very same thing. Men who had seen him heal the sick, give sight to the blind, and feed thousands with a few loaves of bread still found themselves terrified, questioning, and doubting when the waves got too big. This is where the story of Jesus calms the storm becomes more than just history. It becomes our story, because their fear is our fear. Their doubts are our doubts. And the calm Jesus brought to their storm is the same calm he offers to ours today. Here's why this story is so relevant for us. It's not just about Jesus' power over nature. It's about his power over everything that tries to sink us. When we look at this moment, it forces us to wrestle with deep questions. Can faith really coexist with fear? Does following Jesus mean life will always be calm, or will there still be storms? What do we do when God seems asleep in our boat? If you've ever wrestled with those questions, stay with me, because in this story we find not just answers, but hope. Imagine the disciples that night. Many of them were fishermen, men who spent their entire lives on the sea. They knew storms. They weren't strangers to rough waters, but this storm was different. This storm terrified even the most experienced among them. And then, look at Jesus. While everyone else is panicking, he's asleep. Waves crashing, wind howling, boat rocking violently. And Jesus is in the stern of the boat, head on a cushion, resting. That image alone sets the tone for everything that follows. A clash between human panic and divine peace. And isn't that the tension we live in? On one side, we have our racing hearts, our sleepless nights, our questions. On the other side, there is God, unmoved, unshaken, completely in control. Let me bring it closer to home. Have you ever had a night where you just couldn't sleep? Maybe you were worried about your future, your family, or a decision you had to make. You lay in bed, tossing and turning as your mind replayed every possible outcome, every worst-case scenario. It's exhausting, isn't it? Now picture that moment. But then imagine Jesus is right there beside you, perfectly calm, at peace, as if nothing could possibly go wrong. Wouldn't that feel strange? Almost frustrating? You might even ask, how can you sleep when I'm falling apart? That's exactly what the disciples felt, and their raw honesty shows us that God can handle our questions, our doubts, and our desperate cries. Here's the key thought I want you to hold on to as we move deeper into this story. The storm was not just a random event. It was a setup for revelation. A storm designed not to destroy them, but to show them who Jesus really was. Because sometimes it takes a storm for us to see God clearly. If life was always calm, we might forget how deeply we need him. But when the winds rise and the waves crash, suddenly our eyes look for something greater than ourselves. That's where faith is born. That's where trust grows. That's where miracles happen. Over the next hour, we're going to break this story down piece by piece. We'll look at the sea, the storm, the disciples, and Jesus himself. We'll see the contrast between fear and faith, and we'll ask what it means for our everyday lives. Because this isn't just a story to admire, it's a story to live. If you've ever doubted God's care, this story is for you. If you've ever felt abandoned in your pain, this story is for you. If you've ever longed for peace but only found panic, this story is for you. So here's where we begin. A boat, a storm, terrified disciples, and Jesus, silent, asleep, seemingly unaware. But in the very next moment, everything will change. A word will be spoken that no storm can resist. A calm will come that no fear can shatter. And the question we'll wrestle with is this: what does it mean for us when the same Jesus who calmed the sea lives within us today? Stay with me, because this storm is about to teach us more than we ever expected. The story of Jesus calming the storm isn't just powerful because of what happened on the water. It's powerful because of everything that led up to it. To truly feel the weight of this moment, we need to step back into the world of the disciples, into the landscape of Galilee, and into the rhythm of Jesus' ministry at that time. The Sea of Galilee is not a sea in the sense of being an endless ocean. It's a freshwater lake, nestled in the northern region of Israel. But don't let its size fool you. This body of water is unpredictable, surrounded by hills and valleys, with the cool air rushing down from the Golan Heights and colliding with the warm air rising from the lake's surface. Sudden storms were common, violent storms that could sweep across the water in an instant. To the average traveler, the Sea of Galilee was beautiful. Blue waters sparkling under the sun, fishing boats drifting lazily across the surface. But to fishermen, men who had grown up here, it was also a place of danger. They knew the lake could turn on them in moments. One moment you could be pulling in a net of fish under calm skies, and the next you could be fighting for your life as waves crashed over the side of your boat. This is the stage where the story begins, not in a quiet synagogue, not on a mountaintop, but on waters known for their unpredictability. And isn't that the perfect setting? Because life is just like that lake, calm one moment, chaos the next. Now let's zoom out. What had Jesus been doing before he stepped into that boat? He had been teaching, healing, and ministering to massive crowds. Imagine thousands of people pressing in just to catch a glimpse of him, just to hear his words, just to touch the edge of his garment. His days were filled with constant demands. Sick people carried on mats, desperate parents begging for their children, the hungry, the lost, the curious, all pressing in. If you look at the Gospel of Mark, the story of the storm comes right after Jesus spent an entire day teaching parables: the sower, the mustard seed, the lamp on the stand. From morning to evening, he was pouring himself out to the people, and by the time the sun began to set, he was physically exhausted. This detail matters, because when we read that Jesus was asleep in the boat, it wasn't just a symbolic act, it was also the simple reality that he was tired. Fully God, yes, but also fully human. He knew exhaustion. He knew what it felt like to give so much that his body needed to rest. And that makes this story even more relatable, because we often picture Jesus as untouchable, superhuman, beyond the limits we face. But in this moment, we see his humanity, so worn out from ministry that even a raging storm couldn't wake him. And then we have the disciples, ordinary men chosen by Jesus to follow him. Some were fishermen, tough and weathered from years on the sea. Others were tax collectors, zealots, or tradesmen. They were not scholars. They were not priests. They were not the elite of society. They were regular men who had left everything behind to walk with Jesus. And by this point in their journey, they had seen enough to believe he was special. They had seen him heal the sick, cast out demons, and teach with authority no one else possessed. Their faith was growing, but it was still fragile. Think about it like this. They knew Jesus was powerful, but they hadn't yet understood the full scope of his identity. They believed he was the Messiah, but they didn't fully realize what that meant. They had categories for prophet, for teacher, for miracle worker, but God in the flesh, that was more than they could grasp. This boat ride was about to teach them more than any sermon ever could. It was evening when they set out. The sky was painted with the colors of sunset, and the crowds were being dismissed. Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Now this is an important detail. This wasn't the disciples' idea. This wasn't a random journey. Jesus was the one who initiated it. He led them into that boat, knowing full well what would happen next. Let that sink in for a moment. Sometimes, obedience to Jesus leads us straight into the storm. We often think that if we follow God, life should be smooth sailing. No trouble, no hardship, no unexpected chaos. But this story tells us something different. Being in the will of God doesn't mean avoiding storms. It means having Jesus with you in the storm. Another fascinating detail often overlooked is this. The Gospel of Mark mentions that there were other boats with them. Jesus and his disciples weren't alone on the lake. Other people had chosen to follow. Other boats set out alongside them. This paints such a vivid picture. The storm that was about to erupt wasn't just going to affect the disciples' boat. It was going to shake everyone on that water. And isn't that true in life? Our storms rarely affect just us. When a family member goes through sickness, the whole family feels it. When financial struggles hit, everyone under the roof is impacted. When anxiety strikes one person, the ripple effect spreads to friends and loved ones. Storms have a way of spreading. But the miracle Jesus was about to perform wasn't just for his 12 disciples. It was a demonstration for everyone out there on the water that night. Can you picture the scene? The disciples push the boat from the shore. The crowds are left behind. The air is cooling as the sun dips below the horizon. The water is steady. The gentle rocking of the boat feels almost peaceful. Jesus, exhausted from the day's work, finds a cushion in the stern and lies down. His breathing slows. His body relaxes. Within moments, he's asleep. The disciples are talking quietly, maybe about the crowds they left behind, maybe about the parables they still didn't fully understand. Their oars dip into the water in rhythm. For a brief time, everything feels calm. But just beyond the hills, winds are gathering. The atmosphere is shifting. Darkness is creeping across the lake. What they don't know is that their faith is about to be tested in a way they never expected. This is where we pause the story, because in life we often find ourselves in the same place, enjoying the calm, unaware of the storm forming just beyond what we can see. Everything feels fine until the diagnosis. Everything feels steady until the phone call. Everything feels peaceful until the bank notice, the argument, the betrayal, the loss, and suddenly the storm breaks. But here's the reassurance buried in this setup. Jesus was already in the boat. Before the first drop of rain, before the first gust of wind, before the first wave crashed over the side, Jesus was there. And that's the promise for us too. He is with us before the storm even begins. So here's where we leave the scene. The disciples on calm waters, Jesus asleep, other boats nearby, the night settling in. Everything looks ordinary, but beneath the surface, nature is preparing to unleash its fury. And the disciples, these ordinary men with fragile faith, are about to discover something extraordinary. That the man asleep on a cushion has authority not just over sickness, not just over demons, but over the wind and the waves themselves. At first, the night seemed calm. The disciples probably thought it would be an ordinary crossing. They'd been on the Sea of Galilee countless times before. But suddenly, everything changed. The air shifted, the temperature dropped, and in the blink of an eye, the calm surface of the lake transformed into a raging monster. The Sea of Galilee is notorious for storms that arrive without warning. Winds funnel down from the surrounding mountains, stirring the water into a violent frenzy. To those who've never been on the lake, it's hard to imagine the intensity. Waves could rise 6, even 10 feet, crashing into the small wooden boats of the time. Boats barely 26 feet long, only 7 feet wide, and a little over 4 feet deep. Now picture that. You're in a boat not much larger than a modern minivan, with waves taller than your entire vessel slamming down on you. The wood creaks and groans as the boat is tossed like a toy. Water pours in faster than it can be bailed out. The night is pitch black. Rain lashes against your face. The wind howls so loud you can barely hear your own voice. Every sense is overwhelmed. Sight, sound, touch. Salt water burns your eyes. The spray soaks your clothes, weighing you down. Your heart races. Your stomach churns and panic spreads like wildfire through the crew. This wasn't just a storm. This was a nightmare. Now remember who's in that boat. Several disciples were professional fishermen. Peter, Andrew, James, and John had grown up on this very lake. They knew storms. They'd faced rough waters before, and yet this one was so fierce, so overwhelming, that even they feared for their lives. That's a critical detail. If these men, hardened by years of weathering the sea, were terrified, then this storm must have been truly catastrophic. And it tells us something important. Sometimes life throws storms so big that even our experience, our skills, our past victories can't save us. No matter how strong we are, no matter how much we've endured, there comes a moment when the waves are bigger than us, and in that moment fear is unavoidable. But here's the strange contrast. As chaos rages above deck, Jesus is asleep in the stern of the boat. Pause and let that sink in. The boat is being tossed violently. The disciples are panicking, and Jesus, wet, tired, surrounded by the same storm, is asleep. Why? Part of the answer is human. He was exhausted from ministry. His body needed rest. But part of the answer is divine. Jesus slept because he was not afraid. He was in complete peace, trusting fully in the Father's plan. That picture of Jesus sleeping while everything else falls apart is one of the most powerful images in all of Scripture. It shows us the difference between human fear and divine trust. But this moment isn't just physical, it's symbolic. The storm represents more than just bad weather. It represents chaos, fear, and the uncontrollable forces of life. In Jewish thought, the sea often symbolized danger and disorder. It was unpredictable, untamed, and frightening. And here, in the middle of the night, the disciples found themselves swallowed up by that very chaos. We know that feeling, don't we? The storm of bills stacking higher than paychecks. The storm of anxiety keeping us awake at night. The storm of losing someone we thought we couldn't live without. The storm of hearing words from a doctor that change everything. Storms in life are not just inconveniences. They shake the very core of who we are. They reveal our deepest fears and our greatest weaknesses. Imagine the disciples trying everything they could, pulling at the oars, shouting commands, bailing water as fast as they could. Maybe Peter shouted, "James, get that bucket faster." Maybe Andrew cried out, "We can't keep up." Their arms burned, their throats were raw from yelling, and still the water kept pouring in. No matter what they did, it wasn't enough. The storm was winning. And then, somewhere in the frenzy, the realization hit them. We are going to die. This wasn't just bad weather anymore. This was life or death. And here's where the story connects to us. Because storms always do the same thing. They strip away our illusions of control. We think we're in charge of our lives until sickness strikes. We think we can handle everything until a relationship crumbles. We think our finances are secure until the unexpected happens. Storms expose us. They show us what we really trust in. And for the disciples, the storm revealed something raw and honest. Their faith was still fragile. They had seen Jesus heal others, but in this moment, with their own lives at stake, fear drowned out faith. Let's stop for a second. Have you ever felt like that? Like no matter how hard you paddled, no matter how fast you bailed water, no matter how much you tried to control the situation, you were sinking anyway? That's what makes this story timeless. Because the disciples' panic is our panic. Their helplessness is our helplessness. Their cry, "We're going to drown," is the same cry we've whispered in hospital rooms, in empty bank accounts, in sleepless nights. We know what it feels like to be in that boat. And here's the truth. Sometimes storms are allowed not to destroy us, but to reveal what's inside us. God already knew the disciples' faith was weak. The storm wasn't for him, it was for them. It was to show them where they really stood, and to draw them closer to trusting him fully. Because faith doesn't grow on calm seas, faith grows in storms. So here we are. The disciples are terrified. The boat is filling with water. The storm is raging. Jesus is asleep. This tension is almost unbearable. The disciples don't understand why he isn't doing anything. Their fear turns into frustration, and soon it will turn into desperation. But that desperation is exactly what leads to the miracle. Because before Jesus calms the storm outside, he's going to confront the storm inside their hearts. The storm has reached its peak. The disciples are out of options. The boat is seconds away from sinking. And there, in the stern, lies Jesus, silent, sleeping, seemingly unconcerned. The disciples have a choice. Will they keep trying to save themselves, or will they turn to him? And when they do finally cry out, their words echo across the centuries. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" That's the moment everything begins to change. The storm is raging. The boat is being swallowed by the sea. The disciples have tried everything humanly possible, and still the waves win. They are drenched, exhausted, and terrified. Their hearts pound with the realization, we cannot save ourselves. And in their desperation, they turn to Jesus. Mark's gospel records their words. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" This isn't a polite request. This isn't a calm prayer. This is a scream ripped from the throat of men on the edge of death. Their words drip with panic, frustration, and even accusation. Think about what they're really saying. "Jesus, are you even aware of what's happening to us? Do you see the danger we're in? Do you care about us at all?" This wasn't just a cry for help. It was a cry of confusion and doubt. They had seen Jesus heal strangers, but now, with their own lives on the line, it felt like he was absent. And yet, here's the striking thing. The Bible doesn't hide their fear, their weakness, or their doubts. The disciples who walked with Jesus, who heard his teachings firsthand, who saw his miracles with their own eyes, still questioned his care in the middle of the storm. That should comfort us, because if they could doubt, if they could panic, if they could cry out in frustration, then it's okay when we do too. God doesn't ask us to pretend. He doesn't expect us to face storms with fake smiles and hollow words. He invites us to bring our raw, unfiltered cries to him. And sometimes the most powerful prayer isn't long or poetic. Sometimes it's just 3 words. Lord, help me. Let's be honest. Many of us have been there. When the bills pile up and there's no way out. When the diagnosis comes and you can barely breathe. When the phone rings in the middle of the night and life changes forever. In those moments, our prayers don't sound polished. They sound desperate. They sound like, "God, where are you? Don't you see what's happening? Why aren't you doing something?" And maybe you've even asked the same question the disciples asked. Don't you care? That's what storms do. They push us to the breaking point, where our deepest questions spill out. Here's the good news. God isn't offended by those questions. The disciples' cry didn't disqualify them. Their desperation didn't make Jesus turn away. Instead, their cry became the turning point. Because the truth is, the storm was never too strong for Jesus. The danger was real, but his power was greater. What he was waiting for was their cry. Not because he didn't know their need. He knew it before the first wave rose, but because the cry showed their dependence. Prayer doesn't always change our situation instantly, but it always changes our posture, from self-reliance to surrender. Imagine the moment right after they shook Jesus awake. The storm is still raging. The waves are still crashing. The disciples are shouting. And for a brief second, Jesus doesn't speak. That pause must have felt unbearable. Have you ever prayed and felt like God was silent? Like your cries didn't get past the ceiling? That silence can feel worse than the storm itself. But silence doesn't mean absence. Jesus was there the whole time. He may have been silent, but he was never unaware. Sometimes God allows silence so our faith can grow. Sometimes he allows us to feel the weight of the storm so we realize just how much we need him. And here's the deeper truth. The real storm wasn't just outside the boat, it was inside the disciples. Yes, the wind was fierce and the waves were high, but the greatest chaos was in their hearts. Fear, doubt, and unbelief raged louder than the storm itself. That's why their cry matters, because until we admit what's inside us, our fear, our doubt, our lack of control, we can't experience the peace Jesus brings. Their cry wasn't pretty. It wasn't full of faith. It was messy, frustrated, even accusing, but it was honest. And sometimes honesty is the most powerful place to meet God. The disciples' desperate words, "Don't you care if we drown?" set the stage for the miracle. Because when we reach the end of ourselves, that's where God's power begins. So let me ask you, what's your cry right now? Maybe it's, "God, don't you see my marriage falling apart?" Maybe it's, "Don't you care that I'm losing everything financially?" Maybe it's, don't you care that I feel so alone? Whatever your cry is, know this: God hears it. He's not asleep in the sense of being unaware. He's not ignoring you. He's waiting for you to call. Because sometimes the storm isn't meant to destroy you, it's meant to bring you to Him. Here's the paradox. The disciples' cry showed their lack of faith, but it also showed the seed of faith. Think about it. If they truly believed Jesus couldn't help, they wouldn't have bothered waking Him. The very fact that they turned to Him, even in doubt, shows they still had a spark of belief that He could do something. And sometimes that's all it takes. Not perfect faith, not unshakable trust, but the willingness to turn to Jesus even when we're unsure. God honors even the smallest seed of faith. Their cry teaches us something profound. Faith doesn't mean we never fear. Faith means we know who to run to when we're afraid. The disciples didn't handle the storm perfectly, but they ran to the right place. They didn't suppress their fear. They brought it to Jesus, and that made all the difference. So here we are. The disciples have cried out in desperation. Their voices are raw, their hearts are trembling, their faith is hanging by a thread, and in the next moment, Jesus will rise. He will stand in the middle of the storm and speak words that no wind can resist, no wave can disobey. But before He stills the storm outside, He's going to address the storm inside, and that's where the miracle truly begins. The disciples' cry still hangs in the air. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" The wind howls. The boat rocks violently. The waves crash, spraying salt water across their faces. Panic has drained every ounce of strength from their bodies. Their cry is desperate, raw, and unpolished. And then Jesus moves. Imagine the scene. Jesus stirs from His sleep. His eyes open, calm and steady, in stark contrast to the terror around Him. He rises slowly, unhurried, even as chaos rages all around. The disciples are frantic, pointing at the waves, clutching the ropes, shouting above the roar of the wind. They want action. They want Him to do something, anything to save them. And yet Jesus doesn't mirror their panic. He doesn't scramble to grab a bucket or take the oars. He simply stands. Already something feels different. Where fear once dominated the boat, now there is a new presence. Even before He speaks, His very posture radiates authority. Then it happens. Jesus turns to the wind and the waves, the very forces that have terrified seasoned fishermen, and He speaks. Peace, be still. Just 3 words. Not a struggle, not a chant, not a long incantation. Just a simple, direct command. And instantly, the impossible happens. The wind stops. Not gradually, like a storm easing off, but immediately, as if someone flipped a switch. The waves fall silent, the surface of the lake becoming smooth like glass. The boat, moments ago tossed like a toy, now rests gently on the water. Imagine the contrast. Seconds earlier, the disciples were drenched, clinging to life, convinced death was near. And now, the only sound is their own breathing, ragged from fear, echoing in the stillness. The storm hasn't just lessened, it has been silenced. This is the heart of the miracle, because no human could do this. Sailors could steer a boat, fishermen could cast nets, farmers could plant crops, but only God could command creation itself. The Old Testament is filled with references to God's control over the sea. Psalm 89:9 says, "You rule over the surging sea. When its waves mount up, you still them." Psalm 107:29 says, "He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed." Every Jewish disciple in that boat would have known these scriptures. And now they weren't just verses. They were watching them come alive before their very eyes. In that moment, Jesus wasn't just a teacher, a prophet, or a miracle worker. He was showing Himself as Lord over creation itself. The disciples, still dripping wet, look around in stunned silence. Their mouths hang open. Their eyes dart from the calm sea to the man standing in their boat, and awe begins to replace fear. A moment ago, they were terrified of the storm. Now they're terrified of something greater, the realization that the man they've been following is no ordinary man. Mark records their words. "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey Him." That question would echo in their hearts long after the storm was over. But this miracle isn't just about proving Jesus' power. It's about revealing the deeper truth of who he is. Peace over chaos. The storm represents chaos, fear, and disorder. By calming it, Jesus shows that he is the Prince of Peace, the one who brings order to what seems uncontrollable. Faith over fear. The disciples' fear wasn't irrational. The storm was real. But Jesus' presence showed them that faith isn't about pretending storms don't exist. It's about trusting the one who is greater than the storm. God with us. For centuries, the Jewish people believed only God could control the sea. And now, God was with them, in their boat, in human flesh, commanding the waves with a word. Now, let's bring this closer to us, because this story isn't just history, it's a mirror of our lives. We all face storms. Some are external: sickness, job loss, financial strain, broken relationships. Others are internal: anxiety, depression, fear, loneliness. And in those storms we cry out just like the disciples did, "God, don't you care?" And yet in those same storms Jesus speaks the same words: "Peace, be still." Sometimes he calms the storm around us, other times he calms the storm inside us. But either way, his presence makes all the difference. Think about a time when you were overwhelmed with fear or stress. Maybe it was a late-night worry, or an argument that left you shaken, or a loss that felt unbearable. And then, maybe through prayer, maybe through scripture, maybe through a word from a friend, you felt peace. Not because your circumstances changed instantly, but because you were reminded that God was with you. That's what Jesus does. His peace isn't the absence of storms, it's his presence in the middle of them. After calming the storm, Jesus turns to his disciples and asks, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" This question wasn't meant to shame them. It was meant to teach them. He was showing them that the storm revealed what was in their hearts. Their fear was natural, but their lack of faith showed they hadn't yet grasped who he truly was. The storm was the classroom. The miracle was the lesson. Here's the paradox. The disciples' faith didn't grow on calm waters. It grew in the chaos. It's the same for us. We don't grow when everything is easy. We grow when life feels overwhelming, when we're forced to trust God beyond our own strength. Faith isn't built by avoiding storms. Faith is built by surviving storms with Jesus by our side. Some theologians see even more symbolism in this story. The boat has often been compared to the church. Just as the disciples were tossed by waves, so too the church throughout history has faced persecution, division, and chaos. And yet, just as Jesus was in the disciples' boat, he is with his church, guiding it through every storm. The storm also symbolizes the battle between good and evil. In calming the waters, Jesus demonstrates his authority not just over nature, but over every force of chaos and destruction. And for each of us personally, the storm represents our own inner battles, the anxiety, fear, and doubt that rage inside. When Jesus speaks, "Peace, be still," to the storm, he also speaks it into our hearts. Think about how this moment must have transformed the disciples. Before the storm, they thought they knew Jesus. They respected him as a teacher. They admired him as a healer. But after the storm, they saw him in a new light, as the Lord of creation itself. And that's how faith grows, not in theory, but in experience. We don't just learn about God in textbooks, we encounter him in the storms of life. So what does this mean for us? Call out honestly. Like the disciples, we're allowed to cry out in desperation. God isn't offended by our honesty. Trust his presence. Even if he seems silent, even if he seems asleep, he is with us. His presence never leaves. Wait for his word. Sometimes his word calms the storm immediately. Other times it calms our hearts. Either way, his word brings peace. Grow through the storm. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening?" we can ask, "What is God teaching me here?" Storms become classrooms where faith deepens. As the night went on, the disciples sat in stunned silence, the boat now steady, the water calm. But something inside them had changed forever. They would never forget that moment. They would never forget the sound of his voice cutting through the chaos. They would never forget the stillness that followed his words. And they would never forget the question they whispered to each other: "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." That question is the heart of the story, because ultimately the storm wasn't about danger or fear or survival. It was about revelation. It was about showing the disciples and us who Jesus really is. So the storm is over. The sea is calm. But now a new question lingers. What do we do with this revelation? If Jesus truly has authority over creation, if he truly is Lord of the wind and the waves, what does that mean for our lives? That's where the story turns next. The waves have fallen silent. The boat, once tossed like a toy, now rests on waters smooth as glass. The only sounds are the disciples' heavy breathing and the creak of wood settling back into stillness. Clothes are soaked, hands are blistered, hearts are pounding. And then, into the silence, Jesus speaks, not to the storm, but to them. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Notice how Jesus doesn't immediately comfort them. He doesn't say, "It's okay, don't worry, you're safe now." Instead, he pierces straight to the heart of the matter. His question is both simple and profound. Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? These weren't questions for information. Jesus knew why they were afraid. He knew their faith was weak. The questions were meant to expose what was inside them and to help them reflect on what just happened. In other words, the storm was the test, and now came the lesson. Jesus was drawing a contrast between fear and faith. The disciples had fear, but not faith. And the irony is, they had every reason to trust. By this point, they had already seen him perform miracles, healing the sick, casting out demons, forgiving sins. They had watched him care for strangers in ways no one else would. Yet, when their own lives were on the line, their fear shouted louder than their faith. Isn't that us, too? We believe God can heal until it's our diagnosis. We believe he can provide until it's our empty bank account. We believe he can comfort until it's our loss. Faith often feels strong in theory, but storms reveal what's really there. Here's the truth. Jesus didn't calm the storm just to make their lives easier. He calmed it to teach them who he was and to expose the gap between what they knew in their heads and what they trusted in their hearts. The storm revealed their weakness, but it also created the opportunity for growth. Because faith doesn't grow on calm seas. It grows when the winds roar and the waves rise and we're forced to choose whether we'll trust him or give in to fear. Storms are classrooms. They test what we've learned, but they also deepen what we believe. Think about the contrast. While the disciples were panicking, Jesus was sleeping. To them, his sleep looked like indifference. "Don't you care if we drown?" But in reality, his sleep was the ultimate act of trust. He knew the Father's plan. He knew the storm had no power over him. He knew the disciples were safe because he was with them. This is the heart of the lesson. Where they panicked, he trusted. Where they feared, he rested. And he wanted them to learn that same posture. Not of denial, not of pretending storms aren't real, but of resting in the assurance that God is in control. After the storm, the disciples were no longer afraid of the waves. Instead, they were in awe of Jesus. Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. That's the shift storms are meant to bring. They take our eyes off the problem and fix them on the one who is greater than the problem. The storm didn't just terrify them, it forced them to reconsider who Jesus really was. And that's the lesson. Storms don't just test our faith, they expand our view of God. The disciples' journey of faith didn't end here. In fact, their fear would surface again in different moments. When Jesus talked about his death, when they faced persecution, when Peter denied him. But this storm was one of the stepping stones. It planted a seed that would later bloom into bold faith, because eventually these same disciples would stand before rulers and crowds, proclaiming Jesus even at the cost of their lives. Eventually they would face prisons, beatings, and martyrdom without fear. But before they could stand fearless in those storms, they had to learn this one, that with Jesus, they were safe, even in the chaos. So what does this mean for us? Fear is natural, but faith is a choice. Fear will always come knocking when storms rise. Faith doesn't erase fear, but it gives us a choice. Will we listen to fear's voice, or will we trust God's? Faith grows in difficulty. Just like muscles only grow under resistance, faith grows when it's tested. Every storm is an opportunity to trust God deeper. God's presence is our anchor. The disciples were safe not because they had skills, not because they had strength, but because Jesus was in the boat. And the same is true for us. His presence is our safety, even when everything else feels unstable. It may sound strange, but the storm was a mercy. Without it, the disciples would never have discovered this side of Jesus. Without it, they would never have learned the depth of his authority. Without it, their faith would have remained shallow. Sometimes the very thing we fear is the very thing God uses to reveal himself more clearly. What feels like disaster can actually be a doorway into deeper trust. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? This question wasn't just for the disciples. It's for us too. When we face storms, we can ask ourselves, am I letting fear drown out faith? Am I focusing on the size of the waves instead of the presence of Jesus? Do I truly believe he is who he says he is? These questions aren't meant to condemn us. They're meant to lead us closer to him. The disciples' fear has shifted. The storm outside is gone, but now there's a storm inside, a storm of awe, wonder, and the dawning realization of who Jesus truly is. And that sets the stage for the most important part of the story. How do we take this lesson and apply it to our own storms today? That's where we go next. The disciples' boat may have been made of wood tossed on the waters of Galilee 2,000 years ago, but their storm looks very much like ours. Their fear sounds like our fear. Their cry, "Don't you care if we drown?" echoes across time into our own struggles. This is why the story of Jesus calming the storm isn't just about them. It's about us. It's about every person who has ever felt swallowed by chaos, every person who has cried out for help, every person who has wondered if God even cares. Our storms don't always come with thunder and lightning. More often they come in subtler yet equally terrifying ways. The storm of anxiety, sleepless nights, racing thoughts, the constant feeling that something is about to go wrong. Anxiety can feel like waves crashing relentlessly against your heart, dragging you down into fear. The storm of financial strain, bills piling up, unexpected expenses draining your account. The sinking feeling of not knowing how you'll make it through the month. This storm doesn't just hit your wallet. It pounds against your peace, your security, even your sense of identity. The storm of relationships, a broken marriage, a friendship that crumbles, family tension that never seems to heal. These storms cut deeper than any crashing wave because they leave you questioning your worth, your trust, your belonging. The storm of grief loss hits like a storm you never saw coming. One moment, life is steady. The next, you're drowning in sorrow so deep it feels impossible to breathe. The storm of loneliness, surrounded by people, yet feeling unseen, longing for connection, yet feeling like you're always on the outside looking in. Loneliness can feel like being stranded in a boat with no one else on the horizon. The storm of uncertainty, not knowing what tomorrow will bring, waiting for test results, wondering if the job will come through, standing in the tension of the unknown with the waves of what if crashing again and again. Storms come in many shapes. Some are external, others internal, but they all share one thing in common. They test our faith. Here's the hope. Just as Jesus was in the disciples' boat, he is in ours too. That's the first and most important application of this story. We are never truly alone. No matter how dark the night, how loud the wind, or how high the waves, his presence is constant. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it. Sometimes it feels like he's asleep, like he's unaware of our pain. But his presence is a promise, not a feeling. He never leaves. Think about that for a moment. The God who created the universe, the one who calmed the sea, the one who conquered death itself, he is with you in your storm right now. Another lesson we draw is this. Faith is not the absence of fear. It's what we choose to do with fear. The disciples felt fear, and so will we. That's human. But faith means that when fear rises, we run to Jesus instead of being swallowed by it. Faith says, yes, the waves are real. but so is my Savior. Yes, I feel overwhelmed, but I know who holds me. Yes, I can't see the way through, but I trust the one who can. Faith doesn't mean we never feel afraid. It means fear doesn't get the final word. So how do we live this out? How do we apply the calming of the storm to our everyday lives? Here are some practical anchors for when the storms hit. Cry out honestly. Just like the disciples, we're allowed to bring our raw, desperate cries to God. He can handle our honesty. Prayer doesn't need to be polished. Sometimes the most powerful prayer is, Lord, help me. Anchor in Scripture. When the waves of fear rise, anchor yourself in God's Word. Verses like Isaiah 41:10, Fear not, for I am with you, or Philippians 4:7, The peace of God will guard your hearts. Become lifelines in the storm. Remember His faithfulness. Look back at how God has carried you through past storms. Remembering what He's already done strengthens your faith for what He's doing now. Rest in His presence. Like Jesus sleeping in the boat, we can learn to rest in God's care, trusting that He holds us even when life feels unstable. This doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means choosing peace in the midst of it. Stay connected. Don't face storms alone. Share your struggles with trusted friends, mentors, or your church community. Just as multiple boats were on the lake that night, we were never meant to go through storms in isolation. Here's something crucial. Sometimes Jesus calms the storm around us, but sometimes He calms the storm inside us. The miracle may not always be that the circumstances change instantly. The miracle may be that you find peace even when they don't. Think about Paul in prison. The storm of persecution raged around him, yet he wrote about joy and peace that surpassed understanding. Think about countless believers throughout history who faced suffering and yet radiated a peace the world couldn't explain. That's the deeper lesson here. Peace isn't found in calm waters. Peace is found in Christ. To make this real, let's imagine some modern examples. A single mother loses her job. The bills keep coming. She doesn't know how she'll make it. She cries out to God, and while her situation doesn't change overnight, she finds an unexplainable calm. She remembers Jesus is in her boat, and that gives her courage to keep going. A man receives a devastating medical diagnosis. Fear grips his heart. But as he prays, he feels God's presence in the hospital room. A whisper of peace reminding him that his life is in bigger hands than his own. A teenager, struggling with anxiety and loneliness, opens a Bible late at night and stumbles across Jesus' words, I am with you always. In that moment, the waves inside quiet just enough for her to rest. These are everyday miracles. They may not make headlines, but they are just as real as the calming of the storm on Galilee. The disciples asked, Don't you care? How many times have we asked the same? God, don't you care that I'm hurting? Don't you care that I'm scared? Don't you care that I'm drowning? But storms shift that question, because once we see Jesus' power and His love, the real question becomes, who is this, that even the wind and waves obey Him? Storms move us from doubting His care to marveling at His power. Let's gather the lessons clearly. God's power is greater than our storms. No storm, physical, emotional, spiritual, is beyond His control. God's presence is our safety. The disciples were safe not because of calm seas, but because Jesus was with them. God uses storms to grow us. Faith doesn't grow in comfort. It grows in chaos. Storms are classrooms. God cares deeply. Even when He seems silent, even when He seems asleep, He cares more than we realize. The ultimate application of this story is not that storms will never come. They will. Jesus Himself said, In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. John 16:33. The promise is not the absence of storms. The promise is His presence and His victory in the middle of them. That's what it means to live with storm-proof faith. Not faith that avoids difficulty, but faith that stands strong in the middle of it. So here we are. The disciples' storm has ended, but our storms continue. The question is, how will we face them? With fear or with faith? The story of Jesus calming the storm calls us to live differently, to walk in peace, to trust His presence, to anchor our lives in His power. And as we close this journey, we'll bring everything together with one final reflection: the call to deeper faith, to trust, and to respond to the one who commands even the wind and the waves.